an unidentified flying object.
Researcher on a mission with Dr. J.N. Elias.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Welcome back to another episode of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, I am your host, Dr. J, and co-hosting with me live in London is Johnny Webb. As usual, we have an awesome show for you today, but first, let's give you some UFO news. Following up on what we just said on the last show about John Lennon's UFO drawing / sighting, apparently it is a sketch. Okay, here's the story. It's coming out of the Daily Post in North Wales. John Lennon UFO sketch, a fake, claims star's former girlfriend. Well, didn't see that one coming, but at the same time, you know, UFOs make big money these days, especially hoaxes. Now, this one is not surprising me at all. UFO spotted by several people during PGA tournament, and there is actual video of this. More and more of these objects seem to be appearing over larger events. Now, is it visitors or is it military testing, cloaking technologies? That we don't know. But when we bring on our awesome guest, he could tell us so much more about that and so many more news. I got a few other things for you I'd like to read. Another thing. Now, this is my favorite. This goes back to something that all of you have been hearing from me for quite some time. Every time something happens with NASA on the ISS, for instance, you would see something in the background. Boom, the ISS feed is cut. Well, for once, rather than it showing up on YouTube, this actually showed up on Google and in the Daily Star. Alien invasion, ? NASA cuts live feed showing 3 UFOs leaving Earth, and sure enough, what do you see? You see the objects themselves. Why is NASA consistently cutting the feed? If I was running NASA and I was cutting the feed over and over, which raises suspicion, you know what I would do? If I wanted to stop the suspicion, I'd cut the feed in general. I'd make up an excuse and say, well, sorry, no budget. You guys can't watch it anymore. Once a year, we'll send you a 2-hour video of the yearly special, and that's it. But apparently, are they trying to do this on purpose? I don't know, but whatever it is, this is great fodder for the show. Great fodder for everybody. Anyhow, hope all is well with all you listeners. We have an incredible show, as I said. We have the man who knows about literally every single conspiracy. And usually, before we go on a show, I'll have a couple topics ready for you guys. But you know what? This guy has so much information. When we had him on last, it was a split show. If you recall, I'll give you a clue. The second hour was Eric Von Doniken. This was last month. We knew we had to bring him back. And when Mr. Dolan canceled today from some personal injuries, the first call I made was to him of my standby people because I knew we had to get him back on air as fast as possible. And this happens to be the one and only Robert Morningstar. Mr. Morningstar, welcome back.
Thank you, Dr. J. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Yes, it's always a pleasure to have you on because literally this is one thing I love to say when I speak to you. We don't talk about conspiracies, plural. As the way you put it as it's one big conspiracy because everything is linked. Exactly. Well, why don't we pick it up off what I just left off the last piece of news about NASA and the ISS and let's start with that. What do you think the reason for? Because, okay, I see their point that something shows up in the background. So what do? They cut the feed. But why wait 3 days, put the feed up, wait a month or two for something to happen again, cut the feed, and this repeats over and over and over. If I'm not mistaken, 6 times in the last 18 months or so, I've seen video myself. I've actually screen captured twice in the last 18 months myself, not to mention what I haven't seen, of the same exact phenomena, things appearing in the background. Why would they continually shut it down and just bring it back up rather than just shut it down permanently?
Well, it's a big PR operation. It brings a lot of attention and support to NASA. I'm a regular viewer, both on the NASA channel on cable TV. I have access to the NASA channel. And, there are some really good people in NASA that are always trying. And by always trying is, I mean, they are leaking stuff in very subtle ways and just hoping that someone like myself, who pays attention and has good eyesight and is interested in the subject, will see these things. I have been monitoring the live ISS feed for a year and a half or more, and the high resolution, it's incredible quality. The high resolution camera that they're using now, you can find it through NASA and their channels, and just put it on your big screen monitor, and you might as well be in the space station, because I'll tell you, on my 42-inch monitor, I feel like I'm looking out a window with all the comforts of home, which is true. I noticed that you had Story Musgrave on the show a couple of days ago.
Yes, that's right. Sadly, his audio is not good enough, so we released that on YouTube. Everybody can see that exclusively. It will be out tomorrow, but you're absolutely right. We absolutely recorded him and spoke to him. We didn't get a lot out of him. He doesn't believe we've been visited.
I know. No, he doesn't believe we've been visited by extraterrestrials. He sent me a copy of his statement on what he believes and doesn't believe, but it's a very tactfully, diplomatically written document in which he says he doesn't believe that we've been visited by extraterrestrials. But I believe that it's a very subtle way of distinguishing perhaps interdimensional beings or interdimensional visits and ultra-terrestrials, which is one of the terms that is used for the underground civilization of what we would call aliens. If they're not from the surface of the Earth, whether they are from outer space or from under the Earth, they're kind of extraterrestrials. So for this specific race or species of other, some people have coined the word ultra-terrestrials, which means they're inside the Earth, and that may be one of the cases, you know.
Now, going back to actually NASA, and the reason why I'm bringing this is because this is something we were talking about off air. The person, the president, POTUS, the POTUS who happened to be the best for NASA, was Kennedy. He's the only one that made the promise that we would make it to the moon by the end of the decade, or the way he said it with his Boston accent, the decade. Or I just remember it was a really funny way the first time I heard it. I'm like, did he say decade? But of course he did. The point being is he dedicated more money than any other president, and then of course things went down the line. A lot of people claim that he was actually killed because of some knowledge he had or things that he didn't agree with the program of hiding things. And I know you know a lot about Kennedy, not just his assassination, but other things. And one of the things you were even talking about is a conspiracy going back, I believe, to the same year he made that very promise that he will land on the moon by the end of the decade of the 60s.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's the thing. I was, as you mentioned, I was on Coast to Coast a while ago, and several other shows, and I've been drawing from President Kennedy's speeches. And one of the things, the famous speech, is his anti-secrecy speech, in which he states that the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and that we as a people have always been opposed to secret societies, secret oaths, and secret treaties. And in that same statement, he said that we are opposed by a vast global conspiracy that uses covert means. It uses a subversion instead of invasion, and intimidation instead of military force. And there you have it directly from the greatest conspiracy theorist of all time. The President of the United States stated that. We are opposed by a vast global conspiracy. Okay, those are the words of President John F. Kennedy. And today we are opposed by the same vast global conspiracy, which has molted like a snake, shed its old skin, but it's still the same old snake. And it has taken over, it's a philosophy of government that has taken over global financing. And that is the tyranny that we face today. And it has been gobbling up our resources, gobbling up people's lives and welfare. and under the guise and under the color of law. And today I am speaking specifically about what happened yesterday. 3 weeks ago or so, yes, 3 weeks ago, coming up this Friday, the American people, through their representatives in Congress, rejected the TPP. And yet, through all the Machiavellian manipulation of procedures and rules in the Congress, they repackaged the whole thing, and they split something called TAA away from the TPA. Trade Promotion Authority is a delegated power that Congress has surrendered to the president to negotiate these treaties in total secrecy. And TAA was attached to it, which is the Trade Adjustment Act. Now, this Trade Adjustment Act is really an unemployment bill. It is to help people who will be displaced and unemployed by this new economic order to see their way through with a dole, as they say in England, and retraining for a new job. This is a farce. Now, here is the most sinister thing about what happened yesterday. In total secrecy, they split these two bills apart and passed them individually. But when they unbundled TAA from TPA, they rebundled the TAA with something called AGOA. And not a single word was mentioned about this except in The Hill, this Washington newspaper, which brought it out on Monday. And AGOA stands for the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which is basically NAFTA for Africa. And along with this African Growth and Opportunity Act are trade preferences for African nations. So they have ramrodded this act in attaching it to the TAA. But here's the thing that is most outrageous. They are planning to fund the Trade Adjustment Act by siphoning money from Medicare.
Wow. And that doesn't surprise me because they've been siphoning money from Social Security for years.
Security, of course. This has become a bankster organization in government. Funds that were specifically to be isolated for specific purposes are now being used the way banks use derivatives.
Here's what bothers me so much about the Social Security. Okay, all of a sudden it's instigated after the Great Depression. So you have decades and decades of people pouring in their money, which should be accruing interest. So by the time retired, they can get their money. And then you have all these loans that are given with interest. Why is it that the Social Security money that all of us right now that are on the station listening or participating in the show that are feeding into the system is what's paying the senior citizens that are retired now, rather than using the money that they paid 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago? That just boggles my mind.
Because they spent it. They spent it on the Vietnam War. They spent it on welfare programs. They spent it on the so-called Great Society of Lyndon Johnson, which was really one of the most cynical terms ever coined to fool people. If you study history, you will find that the Great Society refers to something historic that happened in England in the 1300s, and it was called Wat Tyler's Revolt. And this was a period of revolution in England where Wat Tyler's Masons tried to overthrow the king. And they dressed in a particularly interesting uniform, which was white cloaks and white hoods with pointed tops. And that was the first ride-out of the Ku Klux Klan. And that secret tradition of the Great Society has been a cornerstone of what they want to build. The Great Society is really another word for the New World Order, as we call it, except that it takes a nation, one nation at a time, with its own so-called Great Society. So it's a very cynical ploy on the part of Lyndon Johnson to call us to become part of that. And,
I don't want to change topic, but I've already received a listener written question for you. This comes from James, I believe it's Parrish, Atlanta, Georgia. Does Robert Morningstar believe there was an MJ12, and is there a current version of MJ12? And who does he think some of the current members are?
Well, yes, I do believe that there was originally an MJ12 and that it's molted and gone through several permutations, and that it has probably a different innocuous name. But it's all part of the NSA, the National Security Agency. The documents that were discovered by Dr. Robert Wood are the most significant proofs that MJ12 existed and that MJ12 was involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. And specifically, I'm referring to something called the Burnt Memo, which came out around 2008. Dr. Wood sent me a copy of it. And
Wait. Burnt Memo, you're not talking about the SOM, right?
No, the SOM is a manual for the retrieval and recovery of crashed spacecraft and the packaging of the bodies in a proper way, down to what kind of tape to use, how many inches of tape, and where to put it on the box, and how to lay. Everything is in SOM-01. And there are many people who believe that the person that leaked SOM-01 was actually President Kennedy, because the first copy of the Special Operations Manual was a kind of photostatic copy or photographs, and it showed a hand holding the book and pressing it open. And a friend of mine sent me a very clear picture of the left hand that was holding the book while the right hand was taking the picture. And he said to me, "Do you recognize that thumb?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." He says, "Well, look, that's President Kennedy's hand. He's the one who leaked the book."
Can you speak a little closer into the mic? We're getting, a little bit low, if you don't mind me.
Yes, I said that a friend of mine pointed out to me the thumb, the hand of the person that was holding up the photographic copy of the Special Operations Manual, and he claimed that it was President Kennedy who had taken it, copied it, and secreted the photos for a time when they would be released. And they came out back in the early 1990s. I do give a lot of credence to that. President Kennedy was briefed on the Roswell crash just a couple of days after it happened, and he's noted in the Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit report that was made after the Roswell crash. And around point 11 or so, it says, it gives a warning, or the Army Intelligence, who wrote the memo, wrote that they had found out that Congressman John F. Kennedy, Democrat of Massachusetts, had learned of these events through unofficial channels, having been briefed on a flight between Washington and Boston by a staff member of the Secretary of the Air Force. And I would remind everyone today that the Secretary of the Air Force in 1947 was Stuart Symington. And I had the pleasure and the honor of meeting Governor Fife Symington of Arizona, who had to deal with the Phoenix Lights when he was in Washington. And I expressed to him my concern about, the way they handled and treated it. But he said that there was nothing else he could do, to placate the people and put down the fears. They decided to use a humorous approach, and they brought out his chief of staff dressed as an alien to kind of lighten up the affair. But in a private conversation, he said to me, "Robert, this thing was so big. I'll tell you how big it was." He said, "You know how wide a New York Times is when you open it up, the double page? Now, if you took the New York Times and held it over your head and looked up, that's how big this was when it flew over me." So the governor saw it too. So I asked Governor Fife Symington if he was the son of Stuart Symington. He said, "No, he's my uncle."
Really?
Yes, and I learned that Governor Fife Symington is a veteran of the United States Air Force as well.
And, of course, as everyone knows, during the Phoenix Lights, March 13th, 1997, he had that famous debacle where he brought the state assembly and said, "We caught the culprit." And he brings an officer with fake, with a
Yes, that's
Halloween mask and handcuffs, and everyone took offense to that. Exactly 10 years later, 2007, finally he admits not only was he kind of forced to do that to
Yes.
quell the cries of the city of the fears, but that he himself witnessed this giant craft flying overhead.
Yes, well, he had to do that. The War of the Worlds broadcast that Orson Welles did in 1939 was so devastating to social order that it became the paradigm, the model for any kind of alien reaction to alien news. So the government from that time on said we can't have panic and we must stop panic at all costs. And I must say that many of the people in Arizona who saw this thing and were being told that it was an illusion or flares, people know what they see. You can't lie to people. You put them under great distress when you tell them that what they saw wasn't there. It creates a state of cognitive dissonance. This is when the mind is boggled, when you're presented with two opposite contradictory statements presented as true. Government says, no, nothing was there. Air Force planes were dropping flares. And the governor of Arizona is looking at a UFO that's bigger than the New York Times spread out over his head. So this creates a great psychological problem. And I believe that our nation is on the verge of mass psychosis because the lies that have been foisted upon us for 50 years have built up to a critical mass, and people are at the end of their tethers, to be quite honest with you. So I feel that what I do when I speak on the radio, exposing these deceptions, is really a form of mass psychology, psychotherapy, because when I speak about things that are proofs. For example, in the JFK assassination, in 25 years, I have not had one rebuttal to my work on the Zapruder film or my work on the doctoring of the autopsy, the brain study, or the alteration of the photos of Officer Tippit and substituting them for President Kennedy's, because my proofs are geometric. It's a theorem, and when a theorem is correct mathematically, it cannot be debunked. So it's very difficult when I put proofs out to debunk them, because they really do stand on their geometry, on the math, for the most part.
I'm glad you used the word cognitive dissonance, because that is a serious problem. But before we go further, I want you to stay on the JFK issue, because I actually just received two questions from this different person, or one person, two questions related to the Kennedys. This comes from Sheila Cohen in Pomona, here in California. Does Robert think that the JFK assassination is related to UFOs, and if so, why? Also, the same question was with Robert Kennedy. Was he killed for the same reason?
Yes. Well, several other reasons. Let me start with President Kennedy. During the last year of President Kennedy's life, he had installed the hotline between Washington and Moscow, and he had conducted over 35 personal exchanges with Premier Khrushchev. And one of the great concerns that President Kennedy had was that UFOs might trip either country into a reaction, believing that one or the other was attacking, because the UFOs were known to make these fast approaches coming from the North Pole and coming over Canada, as if they were an interballistic missile warhead coming in to hit the United States. And this would put NORAD and the Strategic Air Command into DEFCON 2, DEFCON 3, DEFCON 2, DEFCON 1, in anticipation of a nuclear attack. And so, of course, we'd have to scramble and get all our missiles ready for a retaliatory strike. So this concerned him, that the UFOs at times seemed to be trying to trick Russia or the United States into thinking that the other was attacking the country. And so he spoke to Khrushchev about this issue. He also issued a memo to the director of NASA, on November 12th, 1963, just 10 days before he was killed, demanding that the NASA collate all UFO reports referred to as unknowns. He wanted to know which were Army projects, which were Air Force unknowns, which were Navy unknowns, and which was CIA, and which was NASA. And then he wanted to know what was left over so we could figure out what was Russian and what was what I call other. Okay? And he demanded that it be ready by February of 1964 because he anticipated that that year he would begin to, well, he was working for re-election. He was expected to be elected, but he would be working to disclose the nature of the UFO or flying saucer.
When you're referring to the ballistic missiles, you're referring to that same document that Robert Dean found in SHAPE, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, right?
I don't believe it's the same document because this comes from another direction. It was not a NATO document. It's actually, this document is a memo that he wrote personally to the director of NASA, whose name was James R. Webb. They named the telescope after him. And in that, he wants this report, and he wants it on his desk, and he also makes the statement that he wants NASA to extend a scientific handshake, basically, to the Russians to see if they can work together in a joint space project, perhaps to go to the moon. But he asked them to contact the Russian Academy of Sciences and to begin scientific exchanges with the Russians. So those two things were really important. Now, the important thing about this memo is that handwritten in the lower right-hand side, there it says, Angleton has the MJ executive. And that is a very important name. Angleton was James Jesus Angleton, the head of counterintelligence in the CIA. And it says that he had the MJ executive, meaning that he was heading MJ12 at the time.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that name because another name that some people call out for now, 50 years later, is James McConnell, something like that, Mike McConnell. Is that a familiar name with you?
They're both. There's James McDonald. Mm-hmm. James McDonald was a very famous scientist who really knew that UFOs were real, and he was really on a crusade to bring out the truth. He testified before Congress. He worked through, contacts inside the military, people who were leaking information to him. And ultimately, he was destroyed academically, and they say that he committed suicide. But they say a lot of people committed suicide in the aftermath of President Kennedy's death, including famous commander of the U.S. Navy, William Pitzer, who was found suicided in Bethesda Naval Hospital, shot with a gun. The gun was on his desk, and he was shot through the right temple, except his family said, but he was left-handed,
Typical suicide that they've used so many times over the years. Phil Schneider was another one. This guy was as a cripple, barely has a hand, and yet he's able to strangulate himself with a catheter cord and hold it with his other hand. I mean, none of these suicides make sense when you look into the details of them.
Right. Well, this is all part of the control mechanism that was instituted in the 1950s. Now, here's an interesting thing that I learned, that the control of the UFO phenomenon and keeping the lid on what really is happening was transferred by Nixon to the military-industrial complex. When the Condon Report was forged, the University of Colorado, for the United States Air Force to wash their hands of UFOs and say that Blue Book was finished and over, they exited the UFO scene officially through the Condon Report. But the reality is that UFOs have never stopped overflying the United States. And as a result, Nixon saw this as a big problem because they had to answer to the public. So he decided the best way for the U.S. government to wash its hands of UFO officially was to transfer authority and security measures to what is described in something called a Torbit document to an organization that's called DISC, Defense Intelligence Security Command. That may not be the real actual name, but William Torbit was a very high-level lawyer who had inside information on the Kennedy assassination, the secret space program, and UFOs. And that's the label that he gave it, Defense Intelligence Security Command. And now there's a plethora, myriad agencies that are involved with security, and they're actually civilian contractors who work for the government, for one or the other agencies. A friend of mine in Tennessee who's famous, Thomas Reed, he's very well-known.
Famous abductee, that's right.
Abductee, along with his brother Matthew, his mother, and his grandmother, starting at the age of 5 and 7, and then again several years later and periodically. Well, he's been recognized now officially by the town of Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and they have officially recognized the visitation to the Reed family home, because it was seen while it was happening, while the Reed family was being abducted, about a mile and a half away at a country club. Several other people saw the UFO hovering over the house. And over the years, he's presented his work to the United Nations. He showed me the documents, and I was very surprised to see who was sponsoring his hearing. And it was the United Nations Department of Parapsychology.
And
so,
moreover, like you said, it was finally recognized. He was inducted into the New England Historical Society. There is a bench in the city where he grew up in, dedicated to his father, and it was also, like you said, it was mentioned, connected to the UN, and there was also a connection with J. Allen Hynek, if I'm not mistaken, that he talked about.
Yes, they were involved in a movement in the United Nations around 1978 and 79 to bring it to the floor of the United Nations. And in that meeting, which was chaired by the Prime Minister of Grenada, he was trying to bring this to the floor of the United Nations because apparently in Grenada during this administration, an alien body had washed up on shore, and it had been recovered by some fishermen, and they had contacted the Prime Minister, and he had seen it, and they had taken it and put it on ice, and were keeping it in Grenada at the medical school. And the story I'm told about the invasion of Grenada was twofold. One, he had been overthrown by a communist insurrection. Two, the Cubans had been built, the Russians had been building a huge, like 6,000-foot runway in Grenada that was to be a transshipping point, an airport that would be able to ship troops into Angola. They would fly from Grenada to West Africa, where, if you recall, Castro sent a lot of his troops to fight in the Angolan War. And they went back to Cuba contaminated with AIDS, and it was not a good affair for Cuba to involve itself in those African affairs. And the third thing was to stop the runway, seize the runway, stop the communists from having it, and to rescue the students at the medical school, right? That was the story. When it happened, after it happened, they said, we didn't need rescue. We weren't in any danger. But the inside story is, they took over the medical school, and they took over the refrigerator where this body was supposedly being kept by Sir Edward Geary. That was his name, the Prime Minister of Grenada. So that's the inside scoop on that. And it's just something, if you really want to see what the real story is, look at Men in Black, with the comedy. They'll always dress up serious revelations in a comedic fashion, because it's really easier to deal with fear if you laugh at it than if you get all
scared by it.
Panic. Attack from Mars. Remember that? Mars
Yes.
Attack?
Yes, Mars Attacks.
Very
With
interesting
all the
movie.
big stars in it, too.
Yep, it starts off as a very, like, ha-ha-ha laughing comedy, and then it really gets serious when they wipe out the Congress, they kill the president, and it has that happy ending where country music saves the day.
Well, I got two quick comments on, first of all, what you just said. First, I'm going to go to the Men in Black. You are absolutely right in that sense. If you recall, if everybody out there listening recalls, in December of 2012, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, who was under President Putin in Russia, was giving a journalist an interview on state Russia television. Well, he thought the microphone was off after the interview was over, and the journalist asked him, "Is it true that Putin receives daily briefings on the extraterrestrials here on this planet?" And President Medvedev, with a straight face, said, along with the nuclear codes that are received daily by Putin, he is also given a briefing that contains the location of all the extraterrestrials here on Earth, as well as the secret military police, or whatever you want to call it, that is meant to protect us from them by hiding them from us, basically keeping up the cover-up. And then he goes on to say, the reason why I'm saying this is because he goes on to say, if you want to get a good idea of this organization, go watch the American movie Men in Black. And that just blew my mind. And the second comment I want to make, we could pick back up on this, is going back to what you were talking about, Grenada. I was blown away what you just told me, but at the same time, that doesn't surprise me because it's never what it seems at the surface. I have a friend who served in Panama, and I asked him, "Tell me about the war." He goes, "What war?" I said, "What do you mean, what war?" He goes, "It wasn't a war. It was a robbery." I'm like, "What?" We didn't go in there for any real reason other than to literally, rape, pillage, and kill and loot. And that's basically what this is coming from a vet, who served in 8 years in the Army and another 8 years in the Marines. I mean, he was going for career military until he finally get fed up. So none of this that you say shocks me anymore. But at the same time, this Grenada story is absolutely new to me. I definitely love it.
Yeah. Well, the story is in the old UFO Digest. I was contacted by one of Prime Minister Edward Geary's best friends and colleagues in Grenada. His name was Wes Bateman. And he contacted me many years ago and told me the story. And I said, "Wes, this is a very important story. Would you allow us to publish it?" And we did, and it's on the old UFO Digest. And perhaps if somebody types in Grenada UFO and Wes Bateman, Bateman, you may still find it through Google. Another story I wrote about 2 years ago is a very, very serious and tragic story, which is the story of the mass murder of 9 hikers by UFOs in the Dyatlov Pass. And I called it Dyatlov Pass mass murder by UFO. And it's horrible deaths that were suffered by a group of 9 very athletic, very well-educated, you might say the cream of the crop of communist technical intellectual students who were Nordic cross-country skiers, and they went off into a trek to this forbidden mountain. And while there on that trek, they suffered a horrible, horrible death. Some of the bodies were fractured, broken in ways that were just unnatural. Their bones were crushed inside their bodies. Others were burned. Others had radiation exposure, and there was no explanation given except the KGB came to the conclusion that they had succumbed to some inexplicable unnatural force. And there's some kind of good documentaries on YouTube about the Dyatlov Pass incident. and what is his name? Paul Stonehill.
Yes.
Russian UFOs was the first one to bring it to my attention, and that story struck a raw nerve, and people responded to me from around the world, and particularly Northern Europe and Russia, and subsequently I found out that Yuri Gagarin was extremely interested in this case, and I acquired Yuri Gagarin's photo collection of this incident. And when I read it and saw his pictures and saw his pictures of him with his family, I realized this is a really serious case. Now let me look at Yuri Gagarin. Let me look at when this happened. It turns out that Yuri Gagarin was launched into space in a one-orbit mission, and part of the mission overflew this area where this happened, and he took photographs of this forbidden mountain, whose name in the local language, the local indigenous language, this mountain is called "Do Not Go There."
The Mountain of Death. Robert, I'm getting a little more feedback. Can you speak up a little bit more into the speaker?
Sure.
Going back to the Dyatlov Pass incident, you are so right. That is such a super, super fascinating case to me, because not only were the people found, some of them, that they said that their outside body was intact, yet the inside was crushed, like as if they were, just crushed by a car or run over by a truck or steamroller, and the inside of the tents were ripped open as if they were trying to escape. And the part that startled me the most is some of these people ran with their clothes off as if they were running for their lives away from something.
Yes, indeed. Listen to this. I pursued this case, and I got sidetracked from it. I was and I still am intensely involved in it, but I collected all the photographs that were made available by a certain man named D. Ramalkov. He put out this YouTube, and he announced that it was Yuri Gagarin's collection, and that the family of Yuri Gagarin had given him these photographs and this collection because of his sincerity and his interest in the case, and they felt that he was carrying on Yuri Gagarin's legacy to bring this and keep it in public view. So working with those photographs, after I published that initial article, I went back to the photographs, and I found that they had taken photographs of the UFOs as they were being stalked.
Really?
Yes. I published one of them in this first article in UFO Digest 2 years ago. A case of UFO mass murder in the Urals. That was the subtitle, so you can find it with that. The Dyatlov Pass incident, a case of UFO mass murder in the Urals. Okay. While I was studying those photographs, I found a picture of this famous mountain, and 3 meters of snow had fallen during this period of time in February of, I believe it was 1960. So 3 meters of snow, that's like 10 feet, right? And I look at this picture of the mountain, and the mountain had a bald patch on it, like you would see. Let's say you're driving through Colorado and there's a big ski resort where they denuded the mountain. They just raise all the trees and create a smooth surface. But, this was not there was not alpine skiing in Russia in the Urals in 1959. So I look at this patch and it's like, that's odd. That's really odd. Why is that's open land there or whatever it is? It just doesn't seem right. So I took the photo, downloaded it, and put it in my computer, and I enlarged it and enhanced it, and oh my God, it wasn't a denuded patch of the mountain. It was a UFO, and a uniquely shaped UFO that had a kind of, it had a dome, but it was faceted, and it seemed like almost like a 5-pointed star in the bottom or the platform, possibly 8, depending on the angle and how you analyzed it. And then there was something called frame 33, the very last photograph that was taken by one of the victims. He ran away in the snow, and as he died, he took a photograph of what was coming at him. and it was a highly luminous cloud. It looked, when I first saw it, I said to myself, oh, that must be a blurry picture of the moon. It's the only thing I can imagine that would be that bright, that round, that big. And as the guy was falling, he shot the picture, and he got a blurry picture of the moon. I take the same picture, I put it in my computer, and now this picture is totally black except for this white cloud that looks like it's racing toward the photographer. So I enhanced it, I improved the lighting, the contrast, and something called gamma. And all of a sudden, when I hit the gamma, badoom, the whole outline of the mountain in the background that I described to you in daytime appeared, and above the mountain was the moon. So this object that this fellow photographed just before he died was not the moon. It was something that was racing at him, incredibly luminous and frightening, I would say. That was one of the big shocks of this investigation for me. When I raised the gamma to gamma is gain. You know, if you can have a very, very black, dark picture, and I've learned that by raising the gamma, it's almost as if you took a flash photo of this and illuminated everything that's in the dark. Then after that, I went to the other photographs, and I found a photograph of the 9 hikers by the river in this area. And the photograph struck me for several reasons. The body language that was captured in this photograph. 2 people are running away from the river and looking back over their shoulders. One fellow has just turned his face completely away and is kind of burying it in snow. 3 people on the left side are looking up and across the river, and there across the river, hovering over it in front of the forest, is a brilliant white UFO. So these people were being stalked, and they were aware of it. They took these photos. They took 3 photographs of the UFOs, but these photographs have not been recognized by investigators before.
And this is also why the military stepped in, the Soviet military at the time, and sort of prevented civilian researchers. Robert, I just want to give you a heads up. We got about 10 minutes till break. I do have 2 separate listener questions for you. We could either wait till now or after the break. If you want, I'll read them in reverse order. I was hoping we can get them both before break. What I'll do is I'll ask one first, you can answer, and then we'll go to the earlier one. The most recent one, this is from Diego Fernandez in Peru. What can Robert say about the alien base on the far side of the moon attacked by Solar Warden?
I have heard stories about that. I don't really believe that these attacks can be proven, so I won't hypothesize on that. I will say this. I have been studying the far side of the moon for many, many years. And in the last couple of years, I have made some startling discoveries, which I think some of them I discussed on your show. And if I may, I'll send you a photograph. Perhaps we can put up a page.
Yes,
but in
please.
In June of 2010, I discovered an arch bridge on the far side of the moon that was revealed in the highest resolution photograph ever released by the Naval Research Laboratories and the Clementine Project. And this is not an archaic structure. It's not a broken down old bridge that can be argued to be natural. It looks like a modular construction of an arch. Gateway to the west in St. Louis, sort of like that, but a little flatter, and it joins 2 craters. And I have released the photo recently to a couple of different shows, and I'm announcing it. I'll be happy to share it with you. The other thing is I've discovered what I call Hiroshima on the moon, and we're at the almost 1-year anniversary of the secret space program where I presented these findings. And the findings on Hiroshima on the moon is an area of vast devastation that looks to me like a city that was wiped out in the same manner that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed, and that's why I labeled that. But also to emphasize that the threat of nuclear holocaust is something that threatens mankind now, was used in India and Pakistan in ancient times, and apparently destroyed some civilization that existed on the moon eons ago. So keeping the lid on what's going on the far side of the moon is a very big project for NASA. And there's something called Ellerman Tower near the Oriental Basins, Mare Orientale. That is just the most unnatural structure that I have ever found in that region. But the bridge and Ellerman Tower, there's another area called the Belipovsky Crater. You know, these names they're foreign names because the Russians did most of the work on the far side of the moon. They were the first ones to take photographs of it. It used to be called the dark side of the moon before that, but it's not dark. And we now have really good photographs. I have to commend the Russians for what they did with their Luna and Zond probes. It was working with the Russian photographs that I discovered some of these artifacts in really raw form. You know, the early Zonds were very blurry pictures, but Zond 1, Zond 3, and Zond 8 gave me a lead to this area that is called Ellerman Crater. And then I stumbled upon this Naval Research Laboratory photo that's composed out of 22.5 million individual photos. So this can't be debunked as a scratch on the film or, you know, artifact, that nice word they like to use to say scratches or something. It's the real McCoy. And I sent it to Story Musgrave just a few days ago before he appeared on your program. And if I may backtrack for a moment to the space station, I've actually filmed UFOs off my screen that were tracking and following or flying alongside the ISS. And I just was lucky to grab my camera really quickly and start shooting because a few seconds later they cut off the feed.
It's gone. Right. Exactly. I did the same thing. I just happened to turn it on because I monitor it regularly here and there. And I just happened to turn it on. I'm like, wait, there's something there. I immediately turn on my screen capture program. And while I'm capturing it, it just shuts off. And then I check the next day after that. It took 3 days to come back. And this is the most recent incident that I filmed it. I got to hand it to you real quick. You've done awesome work. And despite what people say about the Soviet Unions, with regards to space, they really had it above us with regards to everything except for the moon. They beat us with the first man in space, the first satellite, the first lunar satellite. Every record was broken by the Russians except for us, of course, landing on the moon. So we got to hand it to them.
That's true. They actually did land on the moon before us. They landed their probes.
Yes.
They landed their robots. They actually brought a tremendous amount of rock back from the moon. I learned about this just in the last few years. I didn't know that they'd made landers. They scooped up a lot of dirt, they loaded it up, and they flew some of it back. They have their own moon rocks without having walked on the moon.
That I didn't know. That I got to give them even more credit for. And I'm glad you mentioned, before I turn on to this other question, I'm glad you mentioned the Luna photographs, because one of the UFO stories we gave on the show Tuesday night was that a 50-year-old Soviet Luna orbiter photograph showed an unidentified flying object. So it just goes perfectly with what you're saying. Okay, here's the next question. It's not really related to what we've been talking about, except on the topic of UFOs. This is from, I hope I pronounced the last name correctly. It's Bert, for sure. I think it's Ridge or Ridgy. I'm not sure. Bert, forgive me out there. This is in New Haven, Connecticut, by the way. I don't know if you're a Yaley, but congratulations if you are. Is Robert Bigelow part of the breakaway civilization? And does Robert Morningstar have a guess about what he was looking for when he paid access to MUFON's files?
Well, that's a very interesting question. You're very insightful. Mr. Bigelow was present at the Breakaway Civilization Conference. Unfortunately, I did not have a chance to meet him. And I did not know he was in the audience when I said that Mr. Bigelow has a huge operation already going on.
Wait, back that up. You spoke about Robert Bigelow while he was listening?
I didn't know he was in the audience and attending the conference, and I said, listen, I'm going to tell you folks something. I have seen a space station that nobody else has seen, and this is the God's honest truth, folks. I had one of the biggest shocks of my life on the night that Atlantis returned from the space station, because I stayed up all night. The return began at about 2:30 in the morning, the preparations, the separation, the checklist, and then finally the landing was sometime around 5 a.m. or closer to 5:30 a.m. So I watched the whole thing. Now, when they separated from the space station, this was the last flight of Atlantis, what they did is they did this maneuver where they detached the space shuttle, right? And he just dropped away to about, I thought it was 600 yards away. And then the space shuttle did an inside loop. It went up and around and over in a complete circle, photographing one aspect of the space station and then coming all the way around. And then it stopped. And then they rotated the space station 90 degrees. And when they rotated the space station 90 degrees, it was not the ISS that I saw.
It was a different one.
It was a giant wheel. And in this giant wheel with spokes, and I said, my God, this is just like 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Or Elysium, right? Elysium was the same way.
Yeah, but you know what it is? It's the model that Werner von Braun was holding in his hands in 1954 when he talked about the building of the space station and the staged approach to going to the moon. And so I announced that, and people could hardly believe it. And so I came home and I said, how can I prove this? So I started watching the NASA channel, and I have my camera handy. And then, the NASA channel, if you watch it, it's really sometimes very boring because all they'll show you is the control room. For example, the space station, the ISS control room. And it's like a church, They're like monks. They're sitting there in their cubicles and the computers doing their work. And they don't say anything for minutes at a time. And I look, and in the background were those monitors for the position of the spacecraft and its path around the Earth. And then on the left side, there was this giant monitor that was split into 4 screens. And I noticed that in 2 of the screens was the regular ISS, which I would describe as rectilinear. It's kind of flat and paneled and built out in a kind of quadrangular way. And then in 2 views of that, and then I saw in the other 2 panels the wheel that I had seen the night that Atlantis left. So I ran and grabbed my camera, and I started shooting close-ups of the screen, my own TV monitor, and I got it.
Oh, I would love to see these photographs. I would love to.
I'm ready. You have to wait until the right time to release this information. That's why I've waited 5 years for the bridge, because you have to prepare the ground. Otherwise, it can be too much of a shock for people to even comprehend it, and there'll be, negative reactions. But the way I've been leaking this information and releasing it periodically, it's going over well, and people are titillated, mystified, thrilled. Some are scared. But, so anyway, that's what I did. I said that I thought that Mr. Bigelow had many bigger space stations already in space than any of us know. And the reason I said that was I have a friend in Hoboken who's an amazing photographer. He's captured UFOs over New Jersey and the Hudson River. At times I've seen the same phenomenon. And he walked out into his, outside from his building. He looked up. He's always looking up. His name is Doug Auld. He's a marvelous artist and a great photographer. And he saw this thing in the sky in daylight. And he ran inside, got his camera, and he shot some photographs of this. I have to call it a space station. But it's not a space station that any of us have ever seen. It's not the ISS. It's not the wheel that I saw. It's something else. So somebody else is up there.
This is...
And I'd rather think it's Mr. Bigelow.
So would I. I'd rather believe it's a human than something else monitoring us. But with that being said, let's hold that thought because I want to talk more about Bigelow, also bring on the Skinwalker Ranch, go back to the secret space program, and also talk about some of the economic conspiracies. Everybody stay tuned. We'll be right back in a couple short minutes. Much more with superstar guest Robert Morningstar. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. We are back, hour 2 of Dr. J Radio Live. Of course, let's bring up some housekeeping rules. Of course, if we do take guest requests very seriously, all you got to do is go to drjradiolive.com, drjradiolive.com. Social media accounts, Facebook, Flickr, Tumblr, Google+, Instagram, Twitter, every single thing under the same account name. Dr. J Radio Live. Very easy way to find me. As a matter of fact, that's the name of the show if you haven't noticed. Now, I got to be dead honest with you. Though I was promised you that we would have the Story Musgrave video up to the reason by tonight, but the only reason I haven't been able to get that one up particularly is because when I ran by him with what I was going to show, he was not happy with the UFO videos in it. So I got to create an entire new video just so you guys have a little eye candy as you watch it of just pure NASA footage. So give me some time. I will get that. And to be more honest with you, you guys all know this. The reason why we've been slow on getting all the last month and a half worth of videos up is because I've had a couple back-to-back surgeries, which, as you've noticed, they have not affected me. I have been here on air every Tuesday and Thursday and will continue to do so. With that being said, we are going to ask our guest what's new for him. Robert, where can people find you, your website? And of course, I know you have a lot of amazing information which you keep sharing with me. And you got, I believe, a new book coming out, right?
Well, I'm working on the book at this time, but I have really some amazing articles that I've published on UFO Digest. I did a co-investigation with Greg Boone, and we have released a story called the Poughkeepsie Black Boomerang UFO, 1985. And this is an important revelation because at that time, Mr. Boone was working for the Poughkeepsie Journal. That's the biggest newspaper in the Hudson Valley in the area of Poughkeepsie, New York. And while they were in the editorial offices, the management, the executives, the reporters, the photographers were standing there, and they spotted a UFO in the vicinity of the Poughkeepsie Journal building. And as they watched, this UFO grew rapidly in size and came right up past their windows and over the building. And they ran to the other windows to see where it went, and then they didn't see it. And they realized that it was hovering over the building. And he described this to me so vividly and graphically that I said, listen, I'm going to compose a photorealistic representation of this. So he sent me a photograph of the building taken in daytime, and through inversion and color reversal, I turned it into a night shot, and I inserted a boomerang-shaped UFO, and it's a captivating image. And I sent it to him, and said, just, what do you think of this? And basically, he wrote back, it's great. It's really practically what people saw. And so the combination of that image and his narrative and my co-investigation means that he gave me the name of a second witness who worked at the newspaper at that time, but who has been unwilling until this time to come forward and say to, an independent reporter, yes, I was there. What Greg Boone saw is what I saw. We both saw the same thing. So I confirmed that with a long conversation to someone who lives out west now, and I promised her that I would not reveal identity, and I shan't do that. But it's confirmed, and now here's the amazing thing. I was very fortunate that my friend George Knapp put it on his news feed at C2C at Coast to Coast, and it's gone global. And now what's happened in Poughkeepsie is all these townfolk who had seen this UFO and had been forced by peer pressure and inhibition and ridicule to keep quiet for these 30 years are all coming out and saying, yes, we saw that UFO. Listen, we have to have a real investigation here. And now, since the local radio station, WPDH, carried the story, now the townfolk want to have a town meeting in the fall to discuss this UFO phenomenon. And one of the letters that came back was from a lady who worked with Mr. Boone. And she said, you know, this is amazing. This photograph really struck me. It brought back to mind the day I picked up my daughter at school, and I was terrified because the UFO was hovering over the school. We drove away, and then we saw it hovering over the IBM building, because Poughkeepsie is a real hot spot for IBM. A lot of IBM work that was being done on networking and developing the internet back in the old days, 70s, 80s.
Speaking of IBM, wasn't that also where Corso claimed to have brought in the integrated circuit chip from Roswell?
I think that the integrated chip went to Motorola.
Ah.
Other things, you're right. They went to everybody. Bell Labs got the Maser and the laser. So I do believe Mr. Corso. I think Mr. Corso gave me a very important bit of information. He tells a story of having briefed President Kennedy and Robert Kennedy on the UFO issue. And in the course of telling that story, he mentions a name that I have never forgotten since the day I read it, because it is such a unique name. And this name is Sheffield Edwards. The first time I saw that name, it branded in my brain, because it was dealing with the George Bush memo, in which it's an FBI memo that refers to Mr. George Bush of the CIA and Sheffield Edwards of the NSA having interviewed pro-Castro Cubans or anti-Castro Cubans about the death of President Kennedy in Miami. They wanted to find out how the anti-Castro community felt about the death of President Kennedy, and Mr. George Bush of the CIA and Sheffield Edwards of Defense Intelligence had interviewed him, and they found that the anti-Castro Cubans were very depressed by the death of President Kennedy, because they felt that President Kennedy had started to make advances and improvements. President Kennedy had recovered all of the Bay of Pigs soldiers that had been captured by Castro. He traded food and medicine for them, and he got them back. And on November 18th at the Orange Bowl, he reconciled himself with the Cuban community in the Orange Bowl, into which he was helicoptered in, and no motorcade, because they found out that there was a plot to kill him.
Wait, it is November 18th of 63 or 62?
This is 63.
So 5 days before he died.
5 days before he died, he was in Miami, and then he went to Texas. It was a southern tour. But the Miami police had been recording, they had been tracking, an informant was working with them to expose the Ku Klux Klan. And there was Joseph Miltier was the number 3 man in the Ku Klux Klan, and he was having a poker game with William Somerset. And the Miami detectives had put in a tape recorder, and they recorded the entire conversation. And in that conversation, Miltier said that they were stalking President Kennedy and Martin Luther King, that they had various plans to kill President Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and that one plan involved using a telescopic rifle from a high office building, a knockdown rifle that could be disassembled. And the Somerset said to him, well, that's big. Somebody's going to have to go down for that. And he said, oh, yeah, we've got that set up. They'll pick up somebody a couple of hours after the assassination, and everything will be all right. But in the course of this this document, which I got in the early 1990s, and the tape as well, he makes mention of one plan to kill President Kennedy by having a shooter in a hotel room across from the White House and waiting for him to come out on the porch of the White House, on the veranda.
So they wanted to kill him on the White House lawn?
On the White House porch.
That's sad.
Now, the significant thing about this is in the course of this document, or this conversation between Joseph Miltier and William Somerset, Miltier says that Jack Lee Brown of the Ku Klux Klan is stalking Martin Luther King. And even though President Kennedy was killed in Dallas with the rifle from the high office building, they also mentioned the plot to shoot him when he comes out on the veranda. And that's what they did to Martin Luther King in Memphis. They switched his room from a ground floor room to a back room on a second floor, and when he came out on the porch, on the veranda, that's when they assassinated him. So both plots, to kill President Kennedy and the method used to kill Martin Luther King, are described in this one conversation that was recorded November 8th, 1963. And for that reason, President Kennedy did not have a motorcade from the airport through Greater Miami to the Orange Bowl, and instead they took him by helicopter. And you can bet your bottom dollar that President Kennedy must have said, "Oh, no motorcade? Why?" And the Secret Service must have said, "Well, Mr. President, we know they're after you, and they're planning. We have this recorded." So President Kennedy literally walked into the Lion's Den in Dallas. He knew what was waiting for him. He did not want a Secret Service man to die in his place. He called off the Secret Service men off the back of his limousine. He said he wanted the people to see him. But in my heart, in my gut, I know that President Kennedy, having gone through World War II, the PT-109 disaster, having lost men under his command, did not want another man to die in his place. And to save the Secret Servicemen, he exposed himself. And the rest is history. So
he actually gave his own life, in other words.
Yes, I believe he gave his own life. Rather than, well, some people think he had a death instinct at that time, that President Kennedy was a very ill man. He had Addison's disease, and the doctors did not foresee him living perhaps through his second term. So he was in a rush, you know. He knew his time was limited. He had a lot of work to do, and he tried his best to get the work done. And had it not been for him, we would not have gotten to the moon. And had he lived, we would not have suffered Vietnam, and we would not be in the dire straits that we find ourselves in today.
Interesting. I actually got a listener question for you. Now, this is going back to the Dyatlov Pass incident. And I know we're going to run out of time. Again, we got about 40 minutes left of the show, and I still want to get to the other topics that we talked off air. But again, we will never, ever have enough time because you are so full of knowledge. And this is why we're going to repeatedly talk and talk and talk and get this information out there. This actually is another international question. This is from Gaynor. South London, I hope I pronounced the name properly, UK. Was the Dyatlov Pass incident, the Dyatlov Pass incident was a UFO event. That's the way it's written. Is the UFO of a seeming UFO associated with Dyatlov Pass credible? And if do, where is the original located? I know you talked about that, but I think the listener might have missed that.
Is he talking about the photograph?
Yes, that's what he's asking about.
Well, the photograph you can find on UFO Digest. I published them in the article that's called the Dyatlov Pass Incident, a case of UFO mass murder in the Urals. So it's there. It's also available in the Dyatlov Pass Incident. There's a remake of the YouTube that I discussed that's been put out, and some of the actually, in the remake, whoever remade it, I think it's a group of Italian investigators, they took the enhancements that I published and they put them in there. And I'm happy with people. They didn't give me credit, but I just want to stick it. I want to stick it to them. I'm watching, fellas, you guys in Italy. You took my pictures, but you did a good job with it.
Well, the record is straightened out now, though. You've definitely, got the credit because now you're making very aware to all the international listeners that are tuning in.
Well, listen, folks, there is a little bit of ego, a little bit of it. I get paid nothing for this work. I do it as a civil obligation.
We all
But
do.
I do want credit, and I do put I put a letter M in photographs that I have enhanced, improved, and made visible what was hidden in there. I take an M star and I put it in the lower right corner. I generally hide it and blend it in, but I sign my work. I'm an artist.
I think that's fascinating. I think anybody out there who's got drawings or photographs that needs credit should have a watermark such as that. And I think, Robert, you being so creative, having an M and a star, Morningstar, that is just beyond brilliant. I got to commend you for that. I'm going to go back. Before we went to break, we were talking about Bigelow. I'm going to bring up just this one topic before we go into the general big conspiracies. The Skinwalker Ranch. That is always fascinating me. What was it that compelled Bigelow to go there? And then all these stories of people dying and alien fights. I mean, what happened?
Well, let me tell you something. I know the gentleman who owned the Skinwalker Ranch and suffered all those things, and it's a fascinating case of repeated intrusions, visitations, intrusions, assaults, and my friend who owned the ranch and sold it to Mr. Bigelow, he just got fed up with having to fight aliens. It got to the point where he was sleeping with a samurai sword by his bed. And he actually got up and he whacked an alien that he says he killed it. Now these aliens, when you off them, something strange happens to their bodies. Some of it dissolves. Sometimes the other aliens come and snatch the body. The aliens will not let a human being appropriate a body. They will come back and they will take that away. But what happened is the body was disappeared. However, there was residue on the sword. And he collected the residue, and they sent it to a specialist, a scientist who did analysis of the cells that remained. And he said that it was one of the most unusual tissue samples that he had ever seen, because it seemed to be a combination of plant and animal. And that's a big story. So Mr. Bigelow got an interest in the Skinwalker Ranch and appropriated it. I believe I would like to direct those who really want to know this part of the story to an interview with Colonel John Alexander. He gives about the Skinwalker Ranch and all the strange things that happened there, and what happened after Mr. Bigelow bought it. But Mr. Bigelow is part of the military-industrial complex. That's all I can say. I respect his work. I admire what he's doing. I have long believed that a civilian space agency should be operating, but space is controlled, and you have to get a license to venture there. And Mr. Bigelow has done all the right things, and he's got a space industry, and I hope to see his hotel someday. That's the cover story.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
the space hotels.
Isn't it sad you need a license to go to space?
Well, I think that if you try to launch yourself into outer space without talking to the federal government, you're going to get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that's without a doubt. They could use so many reasons: national security concerns, endangering the public if your ship went down. So many different reasons, and it's just scary. It's super scary. Before I go into the super secret space program, I'm gonna go try to tie in everything. Of course, you know the movie Thrive. Everybody out there listening recalls Foster Gamble, an amazing philanthropist who I really got to give him credit. This is a guy who is the heir to Procter & Gamble and had absolutely every ability to go and be part of the cabal, Illuminati, whatever you want to call him. But instead, he does the opposite. He creates a $2 million film, puts it out for free to educate everybody, and then spends another $4 million to fact check it. And the reason why I bring this up, Robert, is because of the fact he was able to tie in everything from free energy to ancient aliens to current UFOs to the global changes to the financial conspiracies to the corruption of the world to the gold missing and to finally them trying to kill us and to have less of a population on Earth. And that reminded me of when we were talking about initially, before we did last month's interview, about how that this was really, everything is one big conspiracy. And that's what I'm hoping we could sort of either go with that or start with the secret space program and go into the fact how everything is tied in together.
Sure. First, I would like to say that Thrive is one of the most beautiful movies produced in the last few years, and with a higher purpose behind it. And Mr. Foster Gamble, we owe him a debt of gratitude. He was also involved in the secret space program as his sponsor and mentor, and I believe he was present or watching the live stream. I didn't get to meet him, but I hope I do someday. That was a wonderful film. I helped promote it. I was invited to the opening of the film here in New York, and when I saw it, I made sure that I wrote it up in UFO Digest and got the word out. It's well worth seeing more than once. And it's wonderful to see some of the ideas coming true now. In the years since it was produced, many people picked up the hint, the guide, and started working on those projects. The secret space program, I'm very happy to speak about that. It's a one-year anniversary coming this weekend. And the secretspaceprogram.org is the website, and all of the lectures that were given there are available at the Secret Space Program and on YouTube. And we included Richard Dolan speaking on the UFOs and the national security state. And I hope that Richard is all right. You told me about some mishap or something, and I'm covering for him today, and happily so, for my colleague in the Secret Space Program. I hope you're all right. Then there were remarkable lectures by Mark McCandlish on reverse engineering UFOs, Michael Schratt on secret UFO spacecraft and aerospace advances that are U.S. Air Force and government secret projects that he was able to collect by reading industry manuals, industry magazines. But then I believe that one of the most important lectures, two of the most important lectures were given by the ladies. One was by Carol Rosen, who's warning us about a plan to fool the world into believing that aliens are attacking the Earth, and that a series of wars were predicted to her by Werner von Braun in the 1970s, and he foretold that there would be a war on terror, a war against asteroid impact, and then ultimately a war against alien invasion, and to not fall for those, because those were the cover stories to justify the weaponization of outer space, Star Wars technology in outer space. But the other very important talk was given by Catherine Austin Fitz, who revealed how, while she was working for HUD, that she discovered how $40 trillion were built from the U.S. government through military-industrial contracting that had no accountability and no traceability. And she did her best to track this money, and she found that it was shipped out of the United States under various cover stories, and that the great loss of our economic power, the bottom dollar, you might say, has been lost because the Treasury was looted. And the looting occurred to fund a secret space program that involves Star Wars technology. I told you, I've seen this space station. I call it the wheel to distinguish it from the ISS. And that must have taken trillions of dollars.
Well, what year did you say this photograph was taken? Because I'm wondering, was it close to where Werner von Braun did it? Because when you brought that up and you mentioned 2001: Space Odyssey, I brought up immediately the most recent film, Elysium, which was almost identical. It was a circular station colony per se for the rich and famous, and it was just like that, connected with spokes.
Right. Well, as I said, Walt Disney and NASA were working together in the 1950s, and there's a very fine documentary starring Werner von Braun describing the three-stage rockets that he was developing for going to the moon. But the most important element of the project was the building of this space station, and he's holding it in his hands right down to the spokes. So they did build that thing. It's up there. And it's in this twilight zone. It seemed, from what I saw, it seems to be orbiting along the Terminator. So it's neither in night or day. And the photograph, I'll share it with you. I'll dig it up from my archives. Now that I've mentioned it, I think it's time to show it. And you'll see for yourself. It's a giant wheel with a cross inside it, which, strangely enough, is the sign of the Minutemen, the sign of the Ku Klux Klan, the sign of the Druid Order. It's a very ancient symbol, a cross inside a circle.
And that's what's also scary about it, the fact that it was in Stanley Kubrick's film. I mean, again, this goes back to something you said during the beginning of the show, that they like to sort of use mainstream media flicks to sort of take the fear away by adding a little humor to it or drama, but whatever it is, just to keep it not fearful.
Yeah, they also want to create a space, repository in your mind to be receptive. And I liken it to, the game, they have these little cylinders or squares that used to have three steel balls rolling around on a curved surface, and the trick was to maneuver them to drop into holes.
Yes, right? with the mazes, right? It had a maze on it, and you had to maneuver the box or the square.
So that the little ball bearing falls into the hole. Well, I think that this is how they work on us psychologically. They'll use a film like 2001 to create a space in our brains that will be receptive to the idea of going to the moon, meeting extraterrestrial intelligence, and while I'm at it, revealing the face of the alien. It took me 40 years to realize it, to see it. At the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick, in the last 2 seconds of the film, reveals the face of the alien. And that's why we gasped at the crescendo when the music, Richard Strauss and Also sprach Zarathustra, the theme of 2001, is reaching its climax. As the star child is born, you see this profile of the star child, this cosmic baby. The second coming of Christ is actually what it is in the book. And then it rotates. They show it in comparing it to Jupiter. So you see the planet, you see the fetus in profile. But slowly, the end of the film is the face of the baby slowly rotating out of the light and into the shadow. And in the last 2 seconds, and just as it fades away, if you stop that film, you will see the face of the alien inside the face of the baby. And that is subliminal seduction. It's also subliminal implanting of an idea. And it took me 40 years to see it. But now, now that we have DVDs, you can just...
High definition. Yes.
High definition DVD, or even VHS. I actually discovered it in VHS, and I froze the frame, and I published an article in UFO Digest. Again, we have a new UFO Digest, and we have the archives. So in the old UFO Digest, I wrote a piece called "The Face of the Alien," and talk about how Stanley Kubrick did all of those things. He showed us that we were going to the moon. He showed us the monolith. And the relationship of life on Earth to something, some influence in the region, not of Jupiter, but of Saturn. So Jupiter was substituted for Saturn in the story. So revelations, that's what we're experiencing. The alien has always been present in our history. It has intervened, interfered, and also impelled. It's pushed us. It's stopped us at times, but I hope it's a symbiotic relationship. Many people believe that the alien is a parasite, but there is no single alien. If you're talking about the Russians seem to have cataloged over 50 races in the Russian Book of Aliens, and that Medvedev was talking about. The two briefs.
Yes.
One is current events, and the other one is the ancient history of alien intervention. The Russians and the Germans came to the ancient alien hypothesis long before it got to the History Channel. And the German UFO project was intimately related with mediumistic communication with an extraterrestrial race. So there was a trade-off, and it's a very, very sinister trade that was occurring.
Are you referring to a trade between ETs for humans to work on different projects? 'Cause I've actually heard a similar swap program. Is that what you're referring to?
But it's partly that, but it's also just genetic material. The gray alien has a great interest in genetics, human genetics, and preserving their own civilization. I think they're damaged beings, and they cannot propagate on their own, so they're having to use human and cow tissue to keep their race going. That's my fundamental conclusion after 50-something years of studying UFOs and alien abductions and counseling people that have been abducted, and my own personal experiences, sightings and things like that. So they are interested in genetic material and human engineering. And it is possible that their goal is to create an alien-human hybrid.
And do you believe they have? Because a lot of people believe that they've been not only successful, but have been successful at creating these hybrids that look like us. And some people go on as far to say that they're actually walking amongst us. What do you say?
I believe it. I know quite a few people who have had encounters with these hybrids, and they were quite shocked, frightened by the experiences. Some of them right here in New York. New York is a hotbed. I'm telling you, New York is a hotbed of both UFO and extraterrestrial activity. I know a score of people in New York City who, actually, most of the people that appear in James Carmen's The Hidden Hand.
Yes.
Yes. They're friends of mine. There's local UFO meetup groups here in New York that meet, and these are really talented, intelligent people of all races, of both genders, who have had this alien intrusion and abduction experience. And interestingly, in Brooklyn, I visited a site with a woman who had been abducted right off Shore Road, which is near the Verrazano Bridge. And the military element is very, very significant and sinister. Many of the people who have been abducted and have related their experiences to me tell me that they've been taken either to hangars or into ships where not only did they have to submit to the alien mind control, but in some cases they were being used as subjects shown to military officers, people in military uniforms who were observing the demonstration that the alien was offering, saying, this is the kind of mind control that I'm capable of teaching you in return for whatever they want, the technology exchange. So it's very common, and this particular incident happened near an army base, this one in Brooklyn. And when I went to visit the site, I found that it's very close to this Roman Catholic enclave, a Roman Catholic church enclave, and a school there. It's called the Visitation Academy. And my friend had tipped me off about it. He said, you should go over here, because I got abducted outside this in 1956. So my friend Paul Schroeder, who writes for UFO Digest, said to me, you're going to Shore Road, go over there, because that's where I was abducted. And when I went there, I found an entire city block that was walled off. It's kind of like I would say about a 20-foot high wall all around the perimeter. And it's called the Visitation Academy. Now, when I went to the front, there was nobody there. The offices were closed. But what was most significant about this site was that the Visitation Academy refers to the miracle of Fatima. And outside the rectory, as it's called, where the priests live, there's a statue of the Lady of Fatima with the 3 children. And that anniversary is coming up in 2 years. And significantly, the date is October 13th. And it was on October 13th, 2010, that New York had the most massive flyby of UFOs in my memory. Thousands of people were standing on 8th Avenue by 23rd Street watching the fleets of UFOs flying around Manhattan. And it was so blatant that even CBS News was able to capture videos of the sphere-shaped ships that were orbiting. I call them white pearls. These were not flying saucer shapes. They were white spheres, white balls. And I actually think that they may be American, because I've found and released last year, my friend Skywatcher74, who's one of these anonymous people on YouTube and a really great researcher, he released a YouTube video that says Area 51 UFO smuggled out of Area 51. So that was an intriguing title, so I started looking at it, and it's a flight test. It's supposed to be an anti-gravity propulsion system flight test that took place February 7th, 1989. And that's a significant date for me because that's Flash Gordon's birthday. Buster Crabbe was born February 7th in 1907, I believe. So, be that as it may, I'm watching this tape, and these 3 UFOs are making a course around pylons and these strange buildings. And the first time I'm just looking at the 3 UFOs making the flight. Then the second time I start looking and saying, wow, is this really Area 51? And I know Area 51 both from aerial photographs in outer space and satellite photos, and it's a unique, Area 51 runways, they're like a fingerprint when you get to know them. So I'm watching now the buildings, the runways, the taxiways, and I'm saying, whoa, that really does look like Area 51. And these buildings go by, big buildings that with satellite dishes in front of them. One satellite dish had a pyramidal-shaped probe. That means 4 rods came out and met at one point, the apex, and formed a pyramid. And the other one had a tetrahedron, which is 3 rods coming out of the satellite dish and touching at one point to create what Richard Hoagland loves to speak about, tetrahedral geometry, and then these significant towers behind them. So I said, well, I think that's Area 51. All I have to do is find alternate photographs of those buildings, and it'll prove that it's Area 51. And so I go, and there's a great website called the Lazy G Ranch, one word, lazygranch.com. And these people are devoted to Area 51. And they have the best photographs of Area 51 that you're going to see anywhere on the Internet. So I go and I log on to that website, and I go to Area 51, and there are the buildings. Every single building that's in the video is photographed from the air from a very long distance. They took an airplane up to several miles up with very high-powered cameras and shot the runways, and it is Area 51. So I was speaking to my friend Scott Teeters, who's the host of Far Out Radio, who's also, one of my friends and mentors like yourself. And he says to me, those things look pretty small. I said, no, Scott, I think they're kind of big, at least the size of a Humvee. He says, no, I get the feeling they're really small. So I said to him, well, I'm going to go check. I'm going to look for ground references. I'll compare the UFO that's flying in the air. I'll stop it, and I'll compare it to a door, a person, or a car. So I start going through the tape again and stopping, stopping, looking for a building, a door, a person, or a truck, or a car. And lo and behold, I stopped one frame, and I had the shock of my life. I found that there were the 3 UFOs that were in the air. I found 8 more on the ground on a taxiway, 2 by 2. They were all the same type of craft, this white sphere UFO. Like, I call it the white pearl. I've seen it a few times around New York. And so I stopped this frame, and then they have the 3 UFOs that are being flight tested in the air, and then 8 more, 2 by 2, waiting by a hangar and a runway, apparently waiting to take their flight test.
Do you believe these are UAVs, reverse engineered craft that we're using, or actual extraterrestrial craft that we're using, or straight up ETs in their craft on our planet?
It could be either one, because I couldn't see the occupants or the pilots.
Yes.
But I believe that when I see the sphere, the white pearl, as I call it, having seen this flight test from 1989 at Area 51, I say those are ours. But who gave them to us, who showed them to us, I don't know.
And there was 9 of them. Robert, I just got to give you a heads up. We got about 10 minutes, a little over 10 minutes left, and we have so many things we can talk about, but I wanted to actually, essentially offer you which topic you would like to spend the next 10 minutes on, because you have so much information out there. And like you said, this is a civic duty. You mentioned you're doing this for free. We all are. Everybody involved in this network. We're out there to wake the world up. And you know so much information. What messages can we spend in the remainder of the show that you think will be the most profound to wake people up?
Okay, I would like to go back to the very beginning of the program, because you mentioned something about a hoax, a UFO drawing attributed to John Lennon.
Yes.
But I know that the real John Lennon UFO stories, there are 2 of them, and one is that when he was going out with May Pang, a very beautiful Chinese model that he dated a few years before he married Yoko Ono, he was in his apartment overlooking the East River, and they saw a UFO. May Pang saw it, John Lennon saw it, and he was shocked. And he was naked. Jeez, to make a point. He was naked in his house, and he looked out the window, and there was the UFO hovering near the 59th Street Bridge. And they ran and got a camera and shot pictures of the UFO. But when they developed the film, it was all washed out. It was all blank. Which leads me to a point. UFOs are dangerous. They project dangerous radiation. There's a story on my friend Mike Williams has a website called the Sage of Quay, Quay. He posted a really unique UFO story about a woman in the Southwest who took 2 photographs of a brilliant blue UFO, but she got sick, nauseous, suffered some kind of reactions to this viewing of the UFO, to the degree that she became scared of it. She saw it again, but when she saw it the second and third times, she went into her house and she closed her windows, because she felt that her illness had resulted from being exposed to this UFO. Coincidentally, at the same time, now this is a brilliant cobalt blue UFO. At the same time, I had this unusual experience of my roommate buying a shower head with LED lights that lit up when the water goes through them. And they're really brilliant, and they change color with the temperature of the water. But something bothered me about the blue light in these LEDs that were radiating in the shower. And then I started studying. I went to study blue LED lights, and I found that this blue radiation can damage your eyes, can make you sick, and can, over a period of time, repeated exposure at low doses, it said, could affect the cornea and the retina and affect your well-being. And so I put these two and two. I mean, this coincidence that I had this incident with the blue shower light, and I had to get rid of it. I explained to my friend. I sent her the material. I said, this is dangerous stuff. And the color of the UFO was the same color. So I tell people they are radioactive. They are dangerous. If a UFO lands, do not approach it. If a UFO is extremely bright, don't stare at it. It radiates something called actinic rays. And these actinic rays can actually blister your cornea. So UFO is a serious business. Flying Saucer Serious Business is the name of the book by Frank Edwards. But it comes from a statement from a former head of the Central Intelligence Agency, Admiral Hillenkotter, who was exposing the Air Force cover-up. The Navy has been trying to tell the American people the truth about UFOs for decades. And they've been at war with the Army Air Force, which is really what it is. It was one thing before 1947, then it was split into two, but the mentality didn't change. Utmost secrecy. And the Navy has been trying to keep the public in the light, and then the other ones are the cover-up artists. So, now John Lennon, second incident. John Lennon told a story to some friends that one night he woke up in the Dakota apartments and he saw a bright light coming under his doorway, and it was so bright he thought it was Klieg lights and that somebody was filming a movie in the corridor of his apartment. So he got up, he opened the door, and he went out there like, very irate. What the hell are you doing out here? And he was confronted by an extraterrestrial, an alien.
Really? Can you recall what kind of type of ET it was?
A small gray alien. And he says that he walked, he was really assertive. He walked trying to walk right up to him, and it says the alien just put up his palm, and he was driven backwards, and he lost consciousness. And when he woke up, he was in his bed, and he was clutching something in his hands near his heart. And then when he opened his hand, it was this metallic egg. And he was frightened by it. And that he told his friend that he felt that this egg that had been given to him was a tracking device and that he didn't want it. He didn't want to have it because he thought that that was a way that they would be tracking him. So he gave it to his friend, and that was the story. So
if only we could find that egg now. Wouldn't that be great?
It sure would be great. I've been given a hint as to who has it, but I have not been able to inquire of him whether he still has it or whether he did get it. But those are the two famous John Lennon UFO stories that I have known for, over 10 years.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned, especially the first one about May, because May happened, when I read the news report that it was a hoaxed sketch, apparently it was revealed by May, but was she maybe silenced or told, hey, shut up about this or you'll get it to you? Because there's so many musicians that have been influenced by extraterrestrials, whether they have been abducted or they have seen them, or whatever it be, because so many incorporate that into their music.
Well, Robert Johnson at the Crossroads, you know that story. Robert Johnson, the famous blues guitarist, jazz guitarist, claimed he met the devil at the Crossroads, and that, his skills and his ability to compose and play were enhanced by that. I know abductees in New York whose creativity was stimulated by the UFO encounter. There's a Jimi Hendrix story that's quite wild. It's on the internet if you want to look around. And it's Jimi Hendrix at the time, before he was really well known, he was teaming up with Curtis Mayfield, and that he was doing little gigs, in New York State and driving the New York State thruway, and that they got caught in a blizzard, and they lost control of the car, and the car crashed into a snowbank, and that they seemed stuck, and they thought they were going to die in the car, and that a UFO appeared, and an alien came out and walked over to the car, and that Curtis Mayfield was driving, in the story, and Jimi Hendrix was in the passenger seat, And the alien came over to the side that Jimi Hendrix was, and he looked up to him, and they had some kind of telepathic communication. And all of a sudden, the snow was melted around the car enough for them to pull out and to get back on the highway and get back to New York City. Now, that sounds like a far-fetched story until you listen to the lyrics of Jimi Hendrix's song, Third Stone from the Sun. And if you listen closely to the lyrics of Third Stone from the Sun, the person who's speaking is an extraterrestrial overflying the Earth and talking about how foolish human beings are, and may we never hear surf music again. That's the last line of the song. So they have been influencing humanity through art, through technology, through engineering, inspiration. So, I don't know, fallen angels, guardian angels, the mystery is still there.
The leprechauns, dwarfs, fairies. Yeah.
Hey, do you know that Kepler's mother, Johannes Kepler, the famous astronomer, his mother was kept in prison by the authorities for 7 years because they said she was a witch.
Really?
Because, yeah, she said that she had gone to the moon. And she told her son all about the moon and her visitations there. And when they found out about her, they jailed her for 7 years. And only Kepler's fame kept her from being executed, and finally they did release her after 7 years. It's a really interesting story. The best book on, I believe, on the overall phenomenon, a UFO phenomenon, I believe is Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée. He had the insight to see it as a historic relationship, that it didn't start in 1947. It's just that in 1947 we had a new vocabulary, a technological vocabulary to describe this universal experience. But as he went through history, he saw that UFOs have been doing the same thing around the world in every culture, mixing with human beings. As a matter of fact, it's mentioned explicitly in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the scroll called the Chariots of Glory. It describes a tabernacle that it was erected in the center of the Qumran community so that the angels could come and go in their quote-unquote chariots of glory, a.k.a. flying saucers, and where they had sexual intercourse with the Essene women. And one of the most remarkable passages in that Dead Sea Scroll, Chariots of Glory, cites very strict hygienic laws and protocols to purify the woman who should she have contact with quote-unquote angel seed on her arms or her legs, that had to be cleaned up and purified, and a very strict ritual because it was considered apparently very dangerous.
And this is more proof that we literally have been visited through our entire history, as it's scattered everywhere from the Bible, like you said, Dead Sea Scrolls, and so much more. Sadly, Robert, we are out of time again. I really want to thank you so much for being on there. And if you have one final quick message for the listeners in 20 seconds, what would you have to say to everybody?
Okay. I would like you to help me and Greg Boone hit 7,000 hits on the Poughkeepsie Black Boomerang UFO at UFO Digest. It's the most widely read UFO story that we have ever published. We've never had 7,000 readers in 3 or 4 days, and it's a story that's capturing people's imaginations and loosening tongues and freeing people from inhibitions about speaking about their own experiences. And look up Darius. There's another story about Richard Giroux, who was a computer scientist who was abducted in Florida in the 1970s, and he wrote the most amazing description of his abduction that I have ever read or published, and it's called I Am Darius, the Richard Giroux UFO Encounter.
And everybody out there, be sure and check that out. Real quick news. We will be talking about ghosts on Tuesday, and keep your fingers crossed. My good friend Jack Osborne, that's right, Ozzy Osbourne's son, may be joining us live right here and possibly taking your calls next Thursday. I got to make a call for everybody out there who is a genuine abductee who believes they've had an implant. Reach out to me. It's very super important. Final thing, I just got to give thanks. First of all, to our very special guest, Robert Morningstar, to the team who've made Dr. J Radio Live happen. Of course, Johnny Webb live in London. I'm going to give the first two names of the people who are also behind the scenes, Lou and Dave. Also, Danny Benton, who wasn't able to join us today. Tom Schaefer for the amazing website. Keith Rowland for running this network. Art Bell, and you, the listeners. Remember, disclosure is in your hands. Without you, we wouldn't have the show. Again, this is Dr. J signing off.